Hello students, welcome to Digital Learning. I am Shubha Hiremat, Assistant Professor of English, Government First Grade College and PG Center, Dharwad. In this session, we are going to study the pre-independence Indian English poetry. In the previous class, we discussed the pre-independence Indian English prose, the literary background, and the important aspects, and also who are the major prose writers during that time. So, the writing of English in India was a result of India's political, social, and cultural encounter with the West, chiefly with Britain. There was a tremendous change in life and literature of Indian people by the introduction of English education. A world of new ideas was opened to them through the portals of English literature. They started critically examining the foundations of their own society and culture and formulated proposals for social and religious reforms. These continuous efforts found expression both in English and other native languages of India. The first sign of this was found in writing of English verse by Indians. Broadly speaking, the Indian English poetry was of now nearly 180 years old, and for the ease of understanding, it can be divided into two phases: pre-independence period and post-independence period. In the early Indian English poetry, English language reveals several important insights into its origin. The cultural colonization of India was officialized with the introduction of Charter of Queen Victoria in 1832. English now became official language and many Indians accepted it as the medium of expression. English language even today is being continued as the language for official or administrative purpose and also for expressing thoughts and emotions in literature. Thus, in the early phase of Indian English poetry, there was study of English classics, which was promoted, and the mainstream of English literature emerged as a new type of writing known as Anglo-Indian and Indo-Anglian. However, the sensibility and content for writing poetry was Indian, whereas it is expressed through a foreign language, that is English. And for this reason, there were many charges against Indian English literature. How can you express your thoughts and feelings in a foreign language? It was a great challenge for the early writers, and they proved themselves through the many decades during the early phase. There is an impressive list of poets who wrote during 19th and first half of the 20th century. And one thing to be observed is many Indian English poets in the early phase were from upper class because English was taught to them and it was an elite language. And composing poetry was largely an urban phenomenon, which was centered in Calcutta. The publication of Henry Vivian Derozio's first volume, titled Poems in 1827, is generally accepted as the formal beginning of Indian poetry in English. So, Henry Derozio is considered as the first Indian English poet. He was a teacher of English in Hindu College, Calcutta. He inspired many young Indians with love of the English language and English literature. V.K. Gokak, a well-known critic, observes, the first quarter of 19th century was the period of incubation for Indo-Anglian poetry, and Derozio was the moving spirit then. He was a son of Indo-Portuguese father and an English mother. He had started writing in his teens. Before joining as a lecturer in Hindu College, he worked as a clerk. Here his spirit of inquiry, passion of ideas, reformist idealism, and his romantic enthusiasm fired the imagination of many of his students. As a result, the public opinion compelled the college authorities to dismiss Derozio from his service in 1831. He started at Delhi, the East Indian, and suddenly died of cholera. Derozio lived too short poetic career, which was of hardly a half dozen years. There are two volumes of poetry on his name. Poems, which was published in 1827, and The Fakir of Jangira, a metrical tale and other poems in 1828. The shorter poems show a strong British romantic poets in theme, sentiment, imagery, and diction. Not only Henry Derozio, but many other early English poets were inspired to write poems mainly because of the British Romantic poets like Wordsworth, Keats, Byron, Shelley, Coleridge. We find heavy influence of these writers on Indian English poets. A noteworthy feature of Derozio's poetry is its burning nationalistic zeal. We find in his poems like To India, My Native Land, A Harp of India, and To the Pupils of Hindu College. His patriotic utterances certified Derozio as an Indian English poet, a son of soil. He is also a pioneer in the use of Indian myth and legend. E.F. Oden's assessment of Derozio as the national bard of modern India was debatable today. In 1830, the first volume of verse appeared, The Shire or Minstrel and Other Poems, which was by a pure Indian blood, that is, Kashiprasad Ghose. It was an outcome of an ambition to compose original verse in English. His study of prosody and criticism and reading of the best poetry revealed the correct verses. His use of Indian material and Hindu festivals in lyrics show his honest attempt to strike a native wood note. But Kashiprasad Ghose fails only because of the lack of poetic talent. Michael Madhusudan Dutt is also well known as an Indian poet. He wrote some sonnets short poems, and 2 long poems in English. The poets like Scott and Byron were his models. One of his long poems, The Captive Lady, deals with the story of the Rajput king Prithviraj. Here, Dutt takes liberties with history. The other long poem by Dutt, In Vision of Past, is in the form of Miltonic blank verse, with weighty abstract diction and Latin inversions. In this period of Indian English literature, the British rule was accepted as a great boon, and the Holocaust of the Indian Revolt of 1857 ushered in different ideas. Equally undistinguished are Raj Narayan Dutt's verse narrative, Osmin, an Arabian Tale, It Faded Heroic Couplets, Shashi Chandra Dutt's miscellaneous poems, Harchandra Dutt's fugitive pieces. A better title to fame the last two Dutts possess is that they were the uncles of a girl who was to write ancient ballads and legends of Hindustan, a generation later. In this period of Indian English literature, the British rule was accepted as a great boon, and the first phase of Indian poetry was the period of literary renaissance in India. Derozio's poems, Kashiprasad Ghose, The Shire or Minstrel and Other Poems, and Michael Madhusudan Dutt's The Captive Lady and Other Poems are a testimony to the creative upsurge occasioned by the romantic spirit kindled by the Romantic Renaissance. It was ultimately a combined result of these changes that Indian English literature slowly struggled during the next two generations for authentic artistic utterances. With this, I will conclude my session, and in the next session, we will discuss the poetry of Tagore, Aurobindo, and many other major Indian English poets. Thank you.